If you ever look up a list of the hardest games made by design, I'm fairly certain that the original Ninja Gaiden will be around the top 3. This is almost always considered an incredible classic that tests all gamer skill in platforming. Now, although I've heard positive things about the 2 sequels, they don't come anywhere near close to the ridiculous amount of praise I've heard for this game in particular. So I'll just focus on this one. As for the Xbox reboot, I may come back to that later, but they seem to have changed a lot, so it can be its own standalone review. Again, great feature of any series. Anyway, Ninja Gaiden is a side-scrolling action platforming game for the NES. You take the role of Ryu Hayabusa as he travels across multiple unique locations, tracking statues and killing bad guys. The story of this game is told through cinematic cutscenes that look very good considering the technical limitations of the product. Is the story any good though? No, but it's well presented and does a decent job of justifying the action, kinda like God of War. The controls for this game are pretty good, but have several noticeable issues. The first is that jumping takes some time to get used to. He doesn't really gain any momentum, but when you jump, you can only very slowly move backward, which takes some time to get used to, but it's not that bad. You also have a small bit of delay when it comes to swinging your sword on the ground. This would be fine, but when you're in the air, it swings out immediately, so I never got used to the delay on the ground. The rest of the controls are pretty good. Wall jumping is pretty cool in this game, and mastering the wall jump is actually kind of rewarding. You get a nice variety of weapons that are luckily hidden in objects that are floating around, which include birds, mosquitoes, and a lot of candles. You can use these to your advantage, but they use up your symbol things. Sort of like the hearts in Castlevania, except the ammo here is a bit tougher to come by, and the weapons seem to use more of it, though all the weapons are useful in a unique way. I'm not a big fan of this style of only being able to use the weapon you find, because it's really easy to accidentally pick up an item you didn't want, and accidentally get rid of a more useful one, but this may just be me. Now here's the big issue with this game that I found: the respawn zones. I've heard that this is because TVs back then had major cutoff problems, and developers would take advantage of this by having the respawn zones within the screen. This can make the game very annoying because you'll kill an enemy and for a brief moment let your guard down, thinking that it's safe to run ahead, only to run right into the enemy that just spawned just in front of you. This is made even worse by the sword delay you experience on the ground. Furthermore, when you get hit, you fly back, which can cause you to trigger another spawn cycle. This happens extremely often after World 3, which is officially when the game seems to decide, who cares about a fair challenge? Let's make it primarily memorization. I'll say that before World 3, the challenge was mostly fair, with only a few really buggy problems that annoyed me. Past World 3, however, the enemy placement and level design starts to get a bit unfair because they don't match the restrictions placed on your character. Since you have a small delay on your swing, and can only swing at a certain rate, enemies can start to overwhelm you very easily later on, especially when you're unknowingly in a spot where enemies respawn continuously. I'm pretty sure people will say that that's what the extra weapons are for, but I always feel that the extra items should be there to make the game easier, not as an excuse for unbalanced design. Enemies start to get really annoying when they come at you extra fast or in odd patterns that can get you killed in a variety of ways, which include all of the following: air and wall juggling, continuous enemy respawning, or the most reoccurring, knocking you into a pit. I wouldn't mind this last one if it was done well, but a big problem with this game is that enemies often spawn on the edge of a platform you need to go on, or charge after you as soon as you've landed. And because of the delay on your sword, it can be very frustrating to know that you pressed the button just a fraction of a second too late. Through repeated playthroughs of the later levels, you'll start to notice some weird things. For example, you can totally screw yourself by jumping just after you swing the sword because you won't be able to swing your sword at all in the air. The hit detection also becomes a bit biased, especially when there are a lot of enemies on screen. Believe me, this is annoying as hell during the later bosses and on small platforms. Your arm actually doesn't count as a damage area, and since enemies naturally go towards your center, it will be an absolute pain when you are trying to swing at an enemy only to take more damage because your period of invincibility is also very short. All these problems lead up to a game that's difficult mostly because it's really buggy and not well designed. Now, I'll give this game some credit. The levels are actually well placed in terms of action to breathing room places. After a tough area, you'll usually get a small rest zone or something with a different skill set, which juxtaposes nicely with the harder regions. The music is freaking awesome. Nicely varied, ultra cashy, and just plain sweet. By the way, why is Jason all over this game? He's on the walls of the caves, he's some of the enemies, and this is 8 years after the original movie. The bosses are pretty cool, but they get extremely cheap near the end, with one boss whose only strategy that's employable is to go right up to him with full health and whack away, and one who's extremely tough to read with a high penalty for losing. I don't mind hard bosses, but I hate bosses that are hard to read. It makes it difficult because there isn't much of a clear indication as to what I'm meant to do. Of course, I'm pretty sure you all know about the bug with the final boss that causes you to go back 3 levels. Believe it or not, that was a design choice. Apparently, during the finishing of the game, the makers saw the glitch and decided, that's not that bad. Fucking assholes. In addition to being extremely frustrating, this makes getting good at the final bosses an absolute chore, since you have to go back regardless of how many lives you have. This frustration does have a bit of a payoff, however, because beating this game and all its levels in sequence is one of the most satisfying experiences you will ever have as a gamer. And playing this game and breezing through the areas that you know troubled you is wonderful to watch. That, of course, is after beating the game. During the game, it is intensely frustrating because so many of the technical problems that haunt this game. I also think I know why NES players had so much fun with this game as opposed to Virtual Console players like myself. Once they got frustrated near the end, they simply turned off the game, and when they were ready, turned it back on. Through that, they had to play through all the beginning levels again, and in turn gained a sense of satisfaction in knowing that they'd come so far and feeling badass by taking it all down so easily. But here's me. I got frustrated, I go to the Wii menu, turn off the Wii, then go back to playing it later, and get immediately frustrated again, so I didn't really get to play the game the way it was intended to be played. So maybe the problem is my platform of choice. It also may be that when this game was new, there was probably a bigger discussion on how to beat the game among gamers. Whatever the case may be, this is not an example of how to make a hard game good. It's just too damn buggy, and so much of its challenge comes from memorization that you'll have to do to get around the fucking bugs. The platforming is functional, but the design just doesn't work, and so many problems can hamper the flow of your game. As satisfying as this game can be, it's simply not worth investing the time, especially if you're a normal gamer who may not be willing to set himself up for a challenge of such a magnitude of bullshit. My score is a 7.0 for being a highly satisfying game that's too buggy and misdesigned. But for gamers in general, I'm only going to give it a 5.0 because I seriously doubt most players would be willing to invest this much time in something so hard for so many of the wrong reasons. Not recommended.
I'd like some boon cake!